Thank you so much. We're very excited to be here today to present on this. Exciting continuing of adventures for the course that we've been involved in. So we'll jump right into it because I want to make sure we have lots of time to get to the meat of what we're doing. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a background about the course and what led us to use this framework and to look at the learning designer. And then we will jump into a background about that tool, how we applied it to the course, and some of our learnings from that experience over this past semester. So Adam will get into the next. Great. Thank you. And we have no declared no conflicts of interest for this presentation. So as a background, what will be the context of this design tool that we're going to be talking about is the Med 6263 course, which is offered in the Faculty of Medicine. So I'll just tell you a little bit about that as background. This is a graduate level course that's offered for the students in the clinical epidemiology program, as well as it's open to students, obviously, in the community health and humanities program. And it's limited to this department. However, we have had students, if there's been space over the past couple of years, from pharmacy, education, psychology, I believe. So we do have some students coming from across campus to participate. It's an elective course within the program. It's usually offered yearly, although that hasn't necessarily always been the case depending on availability. We do have a class limit of 10 students. We're actually thinking of it, and there's a reason for that. It's quite an intensive, a lot of highly interactive course, and so that actually we may drop that as well, just based on what we've experienced. The whole goal of the course is to train learners how to conduct and critically appraise systematic reviews and meta-analyses. And I just have a little icon graphic on the side there to explain, if you're not familiar with what that research design is, just in a couple of words. So a systematic review and a meta-analysis does sit at the top of our research evidence pyramid. And what it involves is taking all of the studies that have been published in a certain area and having a very systematic way to go and approach that literature to answer a very specific research question. So it's essentially like running your own research experiment, but using your data is actually coming from the literature that's been published. And so you can see from the funnel on the right, you basically have to have this systematic process to look at all the studies that might answer your question, be able to appraise them for quality, and extract the data that would be useful for you to answer your question, and to, if appropriate, combine that data and pool it statistically to try to answer your question, and then come to a conclusion. And these types of studies are really important and paramount, especially when we're dealing with evidence-informed medicine or practice for in any healthcare setting. And it obviously has applications in other domains as well. So for policy making, basically anywhere where you're going to try to make an important decision about something that's going to be important for stakeholders, how you go about that in a systematic and unbiased way, so that you're answering that question and being able to apply it. So it's a highly relevant study design for obviously students within the Faculty of Medicine who are usually working at some aspect of the healthcare field. And it's it's been classically a very popular course within the department. And we'll just go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so it's very popular. And the reason why students really love this course is that they really walk away with tangible products. When you learn about the theory of doing a systematic review and meta-analysis, it sounds pretty simple and straightforward. And there's rules for it. There's handbooks that are available online, like through the Cochrane Review Group, and it all just sounds very like straightforward and like, okay, I can do that. But when you actually get into the nuts and bolts of working with it and trying to work through a review yourself, and all of a sudden you're faced with these decisions and you're faced with like, oh shoot, what do I do here now? That's where a lot of the learning really takes place. And so historically with this course, it's always been about students working through and actually doing a review. And that's where a lot of the appreciation comes from. We've had some feedback from students who've have, colleagues at other universities across the country who've taken similar courses, but had it more focused on the theory versus the practical components. And they've noticed a big difference just from what they've taken away and then what they've talked about with their colleagues. This course, I stepped into this role in a 2016. 2017. I actually took the course from the instructor that had developed it originally, as I knew we would be taking it over, and I wanted to experience it as a learner. And so I got to experience some of that firsthand. It was quite profound on me about learning it and actually doing it. And you kind of see very quickly from the learner's perspective what's going to be helpful. Thank you, Adam. And so Amanda and I teamed up because I knew my background is actually in biomechanics. And so that was part of the reason why I took the course in the first place. That was not necessarily totally new to me, but I hadn't had a lot of practical experience in the methodology. Whereas Amanda Hall is, I would say, an expert, we'll just call her an expert in that, the methodology, and lots of experience and had, experience with the Cochrane group. And so I knew that while I had a lot of background in the teaching aspect, I was looking to partner with someone who would be very strong in the content. And so we paired up and started offering the course in 2018. And we've had this wheel going the whole time, where we've done some intensive planning before the course. We've run through it. We've taken formative, so midpoint feedback from our students, and then at the end from each cohort that's gone through. And we've continued to tweak the design and the delivery of the course throughout the past 5 offerings. And then, of course, the pandemic kicked in, and that turned our wheel of, let's try different things, not upside down, but definitely spun the wheel a little bit, a little discombobulating. And that's partly, I think, where it was Amanda who looked to, some sort of framework or something that would help us as we, had to transition to that fully online version during the pandemic. And then obviously, how that would look throughout the pandemic as we've continued to experience, varying levels of restrictions. Not sure what the next slide is there. Right. Okay. So just a little bit of an overview of what the course looks like. So throughout all the offerings we've done, we've kind of had it, not all of them, but we basically have about a part 1 and part 2, and we've done it both ways. We've had it run in tandem, but for the last couple of offerings and this past semester, we've done it this way, where we have a part 1 and a part 2. The goal, what we've tried to do is have vertical alignment through the goals for each part, right down through the way we deliver the content and then how we assess it. And then there's a horizontal alignment in terms of we parallel what we get the students to do in part 1, and then part 2 is the application. So we're kind of running through the same steps, but we're now having them apply it at each time to something new. So essentially part 1 is where our goal is to try to get to the learner to get to the point where they understand, the who, what, and why of the systematic review and meta-analysis, have some experience of what that feels like at each stage. We get them to work through a mock review that we've curated to take away some of the, hiccups and bumps that can happen when you start a new review fresh and you're not really sure what you're going to find. So we have one set up so that we kind of know where everything's going, and we navigate the students through that, in addition with the content to the theory, the lecture content, as well as some background readings. And then that's assessed through weekly assignments, weekly quizzes, and a midterm exam, which is very focused on, the knowledge acquisition and the understanding level. We want to make sure when they leave the course, they know they have a very good background in the theoretical aspects. The second part of the course is that application. So now we're getting the student to basically step through what they've learned about how you do the methodology, and then we ask them to apply it to a research question that's of interest to them. It may be something that they want to go on and include in their thesis. It may be something that they are going to do as an independent project after, or it may actually just be, an exercise where they go just practice, and maybe they're not intending on actually doing the review, but they get to do this. And so they step through all those same stages that they went through within the content of part one, and they're applying it to their individual project. And that assessment, again, is with those weekly assignments, which is basically just kind of workshopping each stage. We've included weekly check-ins with the instructor, which in person would have just been that last part of our 3-hour class each week where we, chat about their project. This past semester, we did that with one-to-one sessions offline outside of class time with the students. And then they hand in a final paper, which is their protocol, which should be suitable for publication, maybe needing a couple edits once they go back to their team, their research team, but fairly ready for that stage. And I'll pass over to you there, Amanda.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So hello, everybody. I'm Amanda, and I really love systematic reviews. I'm not sure if I should say that out loud, but I was very excited to partner with Diana with this course a few years ago. And yeah, I've loved every offering we've had so far. There's been a lot of iterations. The content has generally stayed the same, but the format has changed to respond to the feedback we've received from the students, as Diana has mentioned. So I returned from mat leave in the summer of 2021 and met up with Diana to figure out what we would do for the next fall and winter semesters in terms of our course offerings. Sometimes we run it in both semesters, so we were just planning on when we would run it and what does it look like for this particular year in terms of COVID, and if it would be online or back in person. So we had decided that would likely be online and or potential some version of a blended learning system. And we'd already done one course online, as Diana had mentioned. And so when we talked about that and what we had learned and sort of reflected on that process and that experience, the didactic portion of our sessions that we normally did in person was the most challenging for us. I think one of the most challenging pieces when we moved to the online offering. So really not able to see, I guess, your audience members and, if they're asleep or if they're engaged with you. There's very little interaction in the online environment as you would get from that sort of organic experience, I suppose, in a face-to-face session. So I thought as a personal goal for myself, for a teaching goal, because I do a lot of the didactic work in the course, and then we have our group sessions, which we each facilitate. But I thought I could try and spice up my didactic lectures. So that was my goal for the summer, was to try and learn how I could do that for our course offering. So that was our plan. I'll go to the next slide, Adam. So when I was looking for courses, I'd already been experienced with the FutureLearn platform. I'm not sure if others are. I use it in a few different research projects. So I'm aware that they offer online courses for free, and you can pay, obviously, if you want a certificate for your records. But I searched there first, and I found quite a few online learning courses. And I focused in on this one. It was from the University College London. I'd experienced some of their courses before, so I felt that I sort of liked how they were set up. I'd used some for my evidence-based medicine course that I was doing, and I felt more confident, I guess, with the material I might receive. And what I liked about this course was it was a lot more. I thought I was going to get some tips for how I could improve my lecturing style in the online environment, but I got a lot more than that when I started this course. So I guess I can go to the next slide, Adam. So the most important thing that I learned from this course was not tips about how to improve my didactic lecture slides for online content or engagement purposes. It was more thinking through the types of learning I'm using generally. So it's very conceptual. The first part of the course focuses in on how you learn from a student's perspective. So it focuses in on just learning as a concept and what we, how we understand that to be. So I got really excited about that because, you know, as a, I guess as an assistant professor and new to teaching from 2018 onwards, I was really growing as in my teaching skills just generally, and looking at all the different learning theories and principles of learning was overwhelming in the first few years. And I found this particular course created a conversational framework that built on all the different learning theories and the key principles of learning and sort of put it into one framework. So I found this course quite useful, and that's how we got to here. So we'll move to the next slide. So this is the conversational framework in its bare bones. We're just going to build the framework here over the next few slides. But it starts here at the learner with the learner in the center. So we think of learning both in sort of learning concepts and through practice. So that's the premise of the framework, that we are focusing on conceptual learning and learning via practice. And the learner is at the center of this particular framework, and they engage with the teacher here on the left-hand side. Well, it's my left, and with their peers or their student colleagues on the right-hand side. So I'll move to the next slide. And so at each opportunity to engage with the teacher or with your peers, there's an opportunity for learning. And I don't have control over the little arrow, but up in the left-hand corner between the learner concept and the teacher concept is where you're engaging with the teacher through acquisition or through inquiry or through production. So you can think of things like the teacher is providing didactic lectures or providing information. That's a very passive form of learning, and that would be what we call acquisition. And it's where the learner is, just as you are right now, sitting and listening to someone tell them about something, and they're learning through like a conceptual manner, so creating a concept from what they're hearing. There's also forms of inquiry and production at this stage, where the learner is being asked to learn via their own questioning. So they develop a question and go look for information to be able to answer it. So that type of thing is very common, I think, in many of our course structures. And production, which I think is key. So you're asking them usually to produce something through your course final or your midterm. So for us, we ask them to produce a final protocol paper, as Diana mentioned. So we ask them to think about a research question that's important to them or that they might be doing as part of their master's or graduate work. And they produce a protocol to answer that particular question for a systematic review and meta-analysis. So all of that's sort of happening up here in this right-hand corner of the framework. And over in the right hand, sorry, I'm not get that right. The learner has another opportunity for conceptual learning with their peers, and that is via the learning style of discussion, as it's called. So this is where you have the opportunity to challenge other people in like a debate type of format, or in maybe of a less, more collegial style, where we have workshops where we get people to present sort of their protocols, and we ask people to critically appraise those protocols of their colleagues, and to generate discussion and ideas about the types of things that they're including in their protocol and why, or why they didn't choose this over that. So there's a lot of discussion. Each of those opportunities offer opportunities for learning at a conceptual basis. So that's the top part of the framework. When we come to the lower part of the framework, we have practice. So we're learning via practice in what we do. So there's practice within your learning environment. So the type of setup that you have in which to learn online, face-to-face, various things about your actual environment and who you're with. And then we have the collaboration with your peers. So we provide practice within our learning environment, as Diana mentioned, by providing a practice data set. So it was one of our sort of key elements of the course, to allow people to have experience with a a pre-generated research question and a protocol that has already been developed with a sample data set that they get to work with, which you wouldn't have time to do if you were developing that from scratch in a 12-week course. So we give them experience with that sort of curated protocol and data set where there are inherent issues that they'll have to solve themselves. So we've left out sort of key points where there's always new issues that come up with following the protocol. So it's not just it's not as simple as it might seem. There are questions that come up they have to problem solve through as groups. So that would be one of our key practice elements. We also have collaboration, then where they work in groups with their peers on these mini systematic reviews. So there's usually 2 or 3 groups answering separate questions along the same lines, but they're separate, so we can get different experiences and have that feedback throughout. So I'll go to the next slide. So like I said, every time there's an opportunity or an interaction between the learner and the teacher, the learner and their peers, or through practice within what we're providing them in the environment. So with a type of systematic review or a critical appraisal, that type of activity that you're giving them to do, or the opportunity to collaborate with their peers, it's an opportunity for learning. And then the next slide just builds on, yep. And similarly, that how we learn is when we develop a concept and we practice the information and feedback we get from practice, then can go back and fine tune our concept. So we have, this framework is quite complex, but it was really, I guess it resonated with me because I was like, whoa, we're doing a lot of these things already in our course, so I can really understand and relate to how it's being mapped to this framework. So that's what I started to gain from the course so far. And I'll move to the next slide, which just basically goes over all the different types of learning that's discussed in the framework. And if you view these, I know there's a lot of words here on the slide, and Adam's actually going to talk us through a little bit of that in a step-by-step format, but nothing here is new. I don't think if you're teaching, you've seen all of this before, maybe in a slightly different format or in a different way of discussing the key principles. But what I liked was that they were all here in an easy one framework for me to access. And that the goal from the framework is that the more opportunities you provide and the more learning styles you use, the better your learning experience should be from the student's experience. So that was my goal. When I went back to Diana, I got excited about the framework. I don't know if she was excited as I was at the time, but I said, I think this would be really good for us to start by mapping our course to these particular learning styles. We're doing a lot of them already. It could really help us understand what types of things we could either improve upon or maybe things that we don't need to be doing as we move forward. And I said I didn't really get a lot for how I can improve my didactic slide deck, but I feel like as step 1 in this course, you really have to understand what it is you're trying to achieve. So that's what I got from the course at the first place. And then you build that into a particular designer, as Adam's going to talk about, and you can think about which types of these learning styles might be best suited to an online environment, or you can either do them sort of ahead of time. Do they have to be done face to face, or can they be done in different scenarios? And that's step 2 of the course, is thinking through then, once you know what you're doing and why, how can you I guess improve it to be in a blended learning environment. And I'll hand it over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Amanda and Diana. So just to let you know a little bit more about how I became involved in this process, I took the systematic review and meta-analysis course in the fall of 2020. That was, I think, its initial offering in an entirely online format. And then this winter, I was invited to apply to be a teaching assistant with this year's iteration of the course. And rather than, participating in the assessment and evaluation of learners like a teaching assistant normally would, I took this University College London course just like Amanda had begun. And I tried to convert what I learned in that course to help with this curriculum mapping process. That's what brings us together today, is to kind of share some of the outputs of that process that we undertook together. So you've got the definitions of these 6 learning types up on your screen, and this was an important part of the course and of our application of the conversational framework. So we have a kind of a audience participation component to this activity. Rather than using the polling feature or application in WebEx, I'm concerned that if I open a poll, all of the other people who are in the other presentations will be able to see it. So instead, as we go through a couple of examples, I'm going to invite everybody to type into the chat window which of these 6 types of learning activities they think are represented in the following vignettes. So I reflected on my own experiences as a learner, dating back to way back when I was doing my undergrad. And I came up with some examples of when I was in these situations and participating in these types of learning activities. And now you get to read about my experiences and see if my interpretation agrees with your own. First one is learners are required to read chapters 5 and 7 on analysis of variance in their advanced statistics textbook before their next weekly lecture, when learners will watch a demonstration of a statistical analysis using SPSS. That's not so important that they're familiar with these statistical processes. It's the type of learning we're looking for. And I just want you to type into the chat room right now, whenever you're ready, which of these 6 types of learning you think this task represents. So I'll just give you a second to just type that in. I'll reveal the answer in just a second. So to sum up, we're having a learner read a couple of chapters. Pam's weighed in with one suggestion. Anyone else want to type in their guess? Feel free. And Pam, you can't answer all of them. Well, I've got a number of them here, so I want to see. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Justina. Maybe because we want to keep things moving. We've had a couple of guesses. I can just reveal the answer. Yes, we would consider that to be acquisition because a learner has been tasked with reading or watching or listening to something. It's a very passive process. And then, yeah, and pointing out that there's an opportunity for discussion. We won't go into, visual depictions of the mapping of a pathway through the conversational framework because we haven't done that together as instructors yet. But just as a starting point, yeah. They do interact with one another, but we're just going to try and zero in on one component of this learning process at a time. So the next one is in a series of biology labs, learners dissect fish specimen and receive feedback on their incision, dissection, and diagram skills over the course of the semester. So which type of these learning activities do you think describes this type of task? Just give a minute for you guys to type in what you think might be the best description here that would fit this. Steve weighing in. Anne, I love that you're connecting these learning activities together. The boundaries between learning activities do wind up blurring a little bit. So we tried to come up with examples that would kind of be purely associated with one type of learning. Most people are saying practice. And yes, that is the example that we had set up for us here. So next one is, as a final term project, learners must submit a term paper about the theme of the illusion of justice and its representation in Shakespeare's The Tempest. Anyone want to wager a guess what type of learning activity this was thought to be? Getting very meta on me, Anne Dorward. I love it. So yeah, some good guesses. Production was not technically an answer, but yes, that's something that the learner has to produce and submit in order to progress through the course activities. 2 more for you. This one is learners are tasked with selecting specific research method of their choice, searching and finding 5 examples of peer-reviewed studies that use that research method, and preparing a presentation to deliver to the class that summarizes what they learned from their review of those studies. Which of those 6 learning activities would you say those are? Yes, some excellent guesses here. 3 for 3. Congratulations, Anne, David, Terry Lynn. We thought of that as inquiry as well. Some production involved as well, Steve, so you're not wrong about that. Last one, students split into groups of 3 wherein each group takes on the role of teacher, the second is a student, third is an observer. The teacher has to explain concept X to the student has to keep asking questions of clarification. Terry Lynn writes collaboration. Anyone else want to wager a guess as well? This one's interesting. This was an example we took right from the University College of London course itself. So this is their example. And looking for practice, Pam weighing in with discussion. So we thought this was an example of discussion, and this was what the University College of London course used as an example of discussion. But Terry Lynn, you guessed collaboration, and I don't think that would be wrong. Collaboration, if we look back at the definition, involves elements of production, practice, discussion, etc., all of those different learning activities, but they're intentionally done in an interactive and collaborative process. So the collaboration can involve elements of all of those different activities, but what distinguishes it is that it is intentionally set up so that learners can learn with, from, and about each other. And if you are familiar with interprofessional collaboration in education, that's in my wheelhouses there as well. So I want to describe some of the outputs of this process and share them with you as we went through and mapped week by week and class by class what we were having students do for Med 6293, is that right? Or 63. Anyways, first thing we did was we used a class schedule document and we mapped out the entire course start to finish. And for each week, we created this document. This isn't a template that was available to us on the as part of the course. It was something that we created ourselves because it fit the context of what we were trying to do in a very visually appealing and accessible way. But there are templates available that will let you do this in a different document. We used PowerPoint, but you can use Excel or whatever else is available to you. And so we kind of mapped out each class as what we had students do in preparation for that week. And then we broke down what students did within each class step by step, and we weighted that by how many hours of time we expected students would be spending on each of those activities. And then it also included any follow-up activities that occurred from that week in that, by January 31st in this case. We needed students to complete a quiz and to submit some sort of worksheet to instructors to make not so much so that we could correct them, but so that we could monitor their progress and make sure that they were integrating these concepts correctly. And then we came out of this with a total amount of time that we expected learners would spend in each week. The actual amount of time each individual student spends on these tasks might be variable, so we just made estimates that we thought the average student would be spending. Then once we had that kind of basic understanding of the course, I attended each one of these classes throughout the semester, and I was observing how much time we actually spent doing each of these activities. And if we deviated from our plan in some way, I would recategorize what we were actually doing when we had students in their class setting. And then we took those observations, that breakdown from the activities, and we put them into this online tool called the Learning Designer. This is a screenshot, and it's a cue for me to stop sharing my PowerPoint slides. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to log into that online tool, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. So first thing to do, you just visit. We can share the link with anyone who wants to do this. It's free. All you have to do is create an account, so I'll just have to enter my password here. You don't have to be taking the course in order to use this learning design tool, but the course uses this tool and encourages its learners to use it to organize themselves and to be prepared to share their experiences with one another. So I have the opportunity to view all of these designs here, And I'm going to walk you through them. There's a few that are related to my work with the Faculty of Medicine, because I'm also a staff member there. And then here are all of the weekly designs that we generated for each week of the systematic review course. And I'm going to show you this one because it's the same one as we just saw on that slide, that template that we created. Here you get a breakdown after you've populated all of the activities and which types and how each of those activities is taking place. You get a breakdown of how much time learners spend doing each one of these activities. So if you're looking to achieve a certain balance, you'll get a good snapshot of how well those activities have been distributed. There's an analytics page as well. I have to turn editing on in order to show that to you. It takes just a second. Up here in the top left-hand corner, we have our timeline, which is where we have the opportunity to specify how many students are participating, how much time is being designed for those activities, a description of what's happening here. Then you get to specify whether the mode of delivery is online, blended, classroom-based, etc. And you get to create a number of outcomes for that activity. And in this case, it would be this weekly class that we've developed this for. And those outcomes are based on Bloom's taxonomy, if that is familiar to anybody out there as well. By clicking on outcomes, you can choose from a number of categories, and there's a list of those action words that can be found in the Bloom's taxonomy as a guide. Down below here, this is where we broke things out into different teaching and learning activities. We specify here what we expect students to do in preparation for their class. Here we break down all of the activities we actually had students do during the class and what type of activity it is. And then over to the right, here's what we expect students to do as deliverables from that week's class and readings. In each one of these activities, you can specify this is acquisition, collaboration, discussion, so on. Those are our 6 learning activities. You can specify how much time you expect this to occur. You can specify whether this is an activity for the entire group or if it's in subgroups of 3. If that were the case, you could just enter in a 3 there, and that would be how you denote that. You can describe how this activity is taking place as whether the instructor is present or not. You can click those to toggle those on and off. And then I'm just going to put that back to make sure I don't mess that up. Whether the activity is online or in person, and here whether it is synchronous or asynchronous. So whether students are doing it apart or if they are intentionally being brought together for that activity. And then here are those 2 follow-up items. Students have to complete a quiz and submit a worksheet after week number 3. I'm going to show you the analytics of this activity as well. So the learning design tool over here on the left, it's going to give you a breakdown of how much time students spend in each one of these activities, and then how much time they spend face-to-face versus online, how much time they spend with the instructor present versus without an instructor being accessible to them, and then the breakdown of how much time they spend in synchronous or asynchronous activities, and whether the class is spent all together for the whole time in small groups or as individuals. So those are some feedback that you get after you complete that design process that lets you answer questions about whether you're achieving the right balance for what you're trying to achieve in all of those activities. So that's a tour of the learning design tool. It's fun to use, very colorful, and it gives you some breakdown, some things that you can toggle on and off as you make a transition from in-person to online learning, or now in our case, moving back from online into kind of a blended learning approach that has a hybrid or mix of online and face-to-face. So I'm going to return to our PowerPoint slides here. And I want to take this even a little bit further to show you what we did with those analytics after we had completed the designs for all of those weeks. And what you're looking at here, you're going to see us compare what we planned to do at the beginning of the semester with what we observed we had students actually do in those classes. So this is what we came up with according to the class schedule. We broke down the proportion of time students would spend in each one of these 6 learning activities, and we have the 12 weeks of the course plotted on the x-axis here. You might recall Diana described this course taking place in kind of parts 1 and 2. And here in these charts, you can see where part 1 involved a little bit more collaboration, some more acquisition and discussion and practice. And then once you get past the assessment week in week 8, where we had a midterm exam, then we have some inquiry coming into play because students are shifting their focus away from the what's, whys, and hows of systematic reviews, and then are starting to apply what they learned in part 1 in an area that is most relevant for them. So they may be developing a protocol that is related to their own research interests, and that's why you see a very stark difference from part 1 to part 2 of the study of the course. So that was what we had planned to do. This is what we actually observed when we broke things down minute by minute. And that really does confirm that we stuck to that part 1, part 2 plan pretty closely in terms of what we actually observed students doing. This is the proportion of time that students spent in each one of these learning activities. We also compiled a summary of how much time they spent in each of those activities. So there's some variability from one week to the next about how much time we're asking students to spend doing each one of these tasks. And this is just another way that we can kind of think critically about what we're having students do over time. And if it corresponds with what we intended to accomplish by choosing each of these learning activities in these different styles and types. And that's another comparison of what we planned to do and what we actually wound up having students do. So we made a plan, and as it turns out, it looks like students actually spent more time doing what we asked them to do than we were planning to have them do. And so that might be a function of some of the assumptions we make. For example, when we designed this time, we assumed students did every one of the readings in preparation for each of their classes. And that might very well not be the actual case. Students may skip some readings, or maybe they just don't have time to get to it, and that's just one of the residual effects of the assumptions that you make when you populate those designs. I turn it now over back to Diana and Amanda to describe some of our plans to get learners' feedback about the changes that had occurred when we moved this program online. And I'm standing by to advance the slides when you're ready.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. So as we just had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we try to stick quite strongly to our wheel of planning and evaluating through reflection. So Amanda and I will reflect on our own about how everything went. And we do take some formative feedback from the students usually throughout the course, usually with a start, stop, continue mechanism, and then try to catch them afterwards, just to see once you've been through the whole experience. And so I'm just gonna I'll detail some of that now. Don't switch. So this year, for this last version, we actually just gave out their final feedback, and we're in the process of getting those responses back. So we have about 50% of the class that's responded to that survey to get their reflections on this past offering. And what we also have planned later on this month is a focus group session where we're actually going to invite not only this cohort, but all of the students who have taken the course since 2018 to come back and have a more fulsome discussion about some of the points that were raised both within the survey feedback, but also just our own reflections as instructors, where we would want more information from the students or to get some of their perspectives. We'll go to the next slide, where we detail just very quickly. Like I said, we've only gotten about 50% of the responses back, and we've mapped it onto the curriculum map here in terms of what they liked and what they disliked about the current offering. And for the most part, they really enjoyed the work they did, whether it was through the actual assignments that they did, the group work component of the class. The quizzes were actually a new feature that we included this year based on of our reflections of our first online offering, where we felt like we wanted a better handle on their knowledge acquisition. So beyond what we would normally have gotten from the weekly assignments, we actually wanted to test their knowledge. And the quizzes were fantastic for that. The students really liked it. The feedback we got on it actually was that they wanted more, they would have preferred to see their answers, and what the correct answers were. And that was a little bit of a technical issue on our part, which we were learning as we went through with D2L. So that'll be an easy fix. They loved the discussion aspect of it. The critical appraisal piece came up a few times, and they love the inquiry part. And again, this comes back to what has classically been the feature that students have always loved, which is that they get to work on something that's going to be meaningful for themselves and useful for their career. Now, of course, we've seen some aspects that they didn't like as much, and part of it comes back to the order and the format of what we're getting them to do. And we've kind of ping-ponged back and forth. Do you parallel and get them to step through that mock curated review and carry along their own protocol design at the same stage, or do you do it part A, part B? We've gone back and forth. There's pros and cons to both. We've heard that from students both ways, and that's something we want to go into more in detail with the focus group. As I mentioned before, just some of the aspects about the quizzes, which is an easy fix, and then wanting more opportunities for presentation. And this kind of comes down to the one comment, which was, kind of loud and clearly heard on our part, was, maybe we spend a little bit too much time in their minds on acquisition with the lectures. And part of that, it's interesting because the online version of it had definitely changed the flavor. We found all the students had their cameras off. We couldn't see them. And so we didn't get that feedback on, are they getting it? Or are they, walking away? And so I think we just kind of meander through, spent more time on this stuff, because we weren't getting that feedback from them. So that is something that we have some plans on addressing in the future as well. Next slide. And it's a point well taken. I think that's probably every course I've delivered, I always come back to that. Like, how can I, break down that didactic time more? And we have this plan for our focus group session, as I mentioned, bringing all those the students back, hopefully having this done in person. And really our discussion, we're hoping to center around the structure, not so much the content, because I think that's been clear that students really like what we have in there is good and it's meeting the needs. We're happy with where we're bringing them. And same thing with the assessment. I think it's mainly more the structure that we want to get at with students. And so we're really looking forward to being able to do that with them. Thanks, Adam.
So I don't know that we had made a plan among the three of us to walk through these concluding slides, but since I created the slides, I don't mind kind of bringing it home. And I know we have just a couple minutes before some questions and answers. So some things we felt worked really well for with using this framework, these tools to kind of map this curriculum and think critically about how it's delivered. This is a useful tool to manage change. It helps that it's free and accessible to everyone. It's very flexible. So it doesn't matter what you're teaching or at which level, whether you're a primary, secondary, or post-secondary educator. I mean, this tool can work for you. And it's based a lot on the concept of building a community of practice around this framework. So many instructors using it as a means of communicating with one another how they approach instructional design and how they use that feedback in order to change their practice. I mean, at this point in time, what we can comment on as limitations of the tool is that evaluating change over time is not something we can comment on right now, since we've just completed mapping a semester's worth of curriculum, and the changes that we make in the future, we'll have to answer those questions about how effective they were when they are implemented. It takes a lot of time to do this mapping process, so it was helpful, I think, to have a teaching assistant, myself in that role, to be able to do that. But you have to find the resources or the time yourself in order to do it. And there are cohort effects that are going to skew the way that you interpret this feedback. So one group of students may be very different from the next, and so you can't repeat the same curriculum with the same group of students and get an accurate feel for how those changes might manifest themselves in a clear picture. Our main takeaways, I guess, to communicate to you is that this is not a one and done kind of an application, that it's the beginning of a process that you're going to use this tool and commit to using it to organize yourself in the future. And it will become easier once you invest the effort at the beginning in order to do this mapping exercise, and then you can tweak it as you go along. And it was as much a tool for us to reflect on our own practice as educators as it was for centering our activities around learners' experiences. I already mentioned how community of practice builds around the learning design process using this tool. And our questions for you, I mean, you can ask any questions of us you like, of course, but our questions for you as an audience would be if you could see using this tool in your own practice, and if you don't already have one, if you don't use this tool, do you use a different one? What works for you? We want to know. And now that you've heard about some of our experiences. This is a reminder to share this link with anyone who wants to go to Future Learn and sign up, take the course for free. That's your prerogative. And there's our thumbs up emoji to say thanks for your time, and we welcome any of your questions or comments. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment, but I can show anyone any of our slides again if they would like to see that.
I think we have a comment from Steve. Steve, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, myself and Dave Stokes been kind of exchanging some comments back and forth, and we were just wondering, this is a potentially great tool for a variety of courses that we support here in HSIMS as the instructional design team. So my question would be, would it be up to the instructor and the learner and I guess the outcomes to decide what that balance should be? And I would think that it would depend on the context of the subject matter, but I'm just wondering from your perspective and your course, what kind of a balance were you looking for between the six? Just curious as to what you were thinking.
Yeah. Do you want me to have a go at that? Okay, this is Amanda. So we didn't actually have a breakdown that we were intending for. We wanted to try and maximize as many as we could. So when we first designed the course, we didn't have this designer at all, but we were trying to think about the different learning styles that we wanted to provide to the students, with practice and discussion and collaboration being some of the key ones for us. So we really thought that having them step through the practice systematic review was really important. We wanted to have opportunities for that group and collaborative learning, and we really wanted to have some presentation where they were able to get feedback and have to answer questions from their peers. So we prioritized those three. We knew that there was going to be acquisition, but we wanted those three to come out. So when we were thinking about mapping the course, I was hoping that we would have a lot of those three for sure. And maybe not as much acquisition, but as you can see, and when we mapped it, we still have quite a lot of acquisition. And we've always set up the course in our syllabus to have the first hour being acquisition based, with opportunities for I guess some discussion, but it was going to always largely be acquisition, with the second hour being practice and the third hour generally being some form of application or inquiry. But I guess, and inquiry was the other one. So I wanted to see those four, but I feel that we have still a little bit of ways to go.
So can I just ask a quick follow-up, Amanda, to that?
Yes.
So this is your first iteration of the course, I'm thinking, yes?
The first,
so,
well, we've been doing it for 3 years, and so we run it.
But I mean, sorry, using this tool, mapping it with this tool is what I meant.
Yes.
Yeah. So so basically this kind of forms your baseline now. So looking at the results, and I know you said you didn't get a great number of students for your feedback, but moving forward, what would you change based using this tool?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I'm going to ask, sorry, I'm just going to start first, but I think Diane and Adam have their own thoughts. But I think we want the learners to be more involved. That was one of the key aspects for us, was to get their feedback on which things that they really enjoyed doing. So at the moment, it's just Diana and I. When we thought about it, we thought, well, this is where we think learning will happen the most from our own experience as learners. But we really want to get that understanding from people who've gone through the course so far. So that's where we're headed, is to see from the learner's perspective, what things that we might change or do a little bit differently. But we also, I guess the other two options we wanted are feasibility. Some of the things that we're offering actually take quite a lot of time. And if there weren't two instructors, we may not be able to do them. And the other aspect is outcomes. So we really like to know how well each of these particular activities that we're doing relate to actual outcomes of learning. So if we're seeing that sort of performance improving based on having all this practice, for example. I'll just turn it back over to Jen.
And I guess to circle back to your question about context, right? So I think you're always trying to map out what you're actually trying, what your learning goal is for the students. And so just, you know, reminding you back about our plan, right? Our map from what our goal was and where we wanted to get the students and how we were going to assess them starts to drive the type of learning style that you're going to be using. And so it was always our intention that we would have quite a bit of acquisition in that beginning, because that's what we were intending. We want them to learn about how to do it, why you would do things, and then we wanted them to practice it. So I would think when you apply this to any course, you need to come back to the goals and the alignment and what you're trying to get them to do. And that would really help you drive the boxes. In terms of this offering, I think, you know, the tool, we always know you end up spending a bit more time on acquisition. I think it was really, you know, not eye-opening. We knew it was kind of like that, but it's great to see that and say, okay, how could we change that up? But as Amanda said, we don't want to go and do that necessarily without getting some feedback first. So we're really going to be looking forward to having that discussion with the learners and ourselves as well.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, one of our learning goals has changed over time on what we want people to walk away with. So we would like them to know theories and practices of systematic reviews, but to be able to develop their own protocol was something we thought was extremely important. A protocol that was ready and able to be implemented. So that had been, you know, really well thought through, because you can end up without, you know, the protocol being designed, running into a lot of problems later. So that is one of the goals that we have, but we would like to reevaluate and see if that's a goal that the learners also share.
I guess I have two thoughts. No, I'm not muted. Okay. Two thoughts here. First, I think there are some circumstances that change the experience of courses without us being in control of them, and like a shift from in-person to online and then to hybrid may be one of those. So if you were to change nothing about your plan, but you were to change the way that we imagined the curriculum to be designed as from online to in-person or back, I think that that baseline measure gives you an opportunity to measure and compare the feedback you get from one modality to the other with a more nuanced or complete understanding of what you're asking students to do and how what you actually do deviates from what you plan to do. And the other thing I'd like to see, you know, and I'd like to explore is what the impact would be if you, at the beginning of your course, you said, okay, guys, there are 6 different types of learning we're going to ask you to do at various points over this experience that we have together. And that helps create a prompt or a cue for learners so that they know what your expectations are a little bit more clearly. So we're going to have an inquiry-based activity, and automatically the student knows what to expect of that interaction and who's going to be involved and what's going to come out of that process. And that's not something that we did, and I don't know if it's something that actually gets recommended by the course designers at the beginning, but I think that could be a really powerful addition to any curriculum in any setting so that students understand their role a little bit more clearly and can identify what those expectations are a little bit more clearly as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that I especially with the undergrads, I've always emphasized, right? Like this is the type of experiential learning techniques I'm going to use, or the strategies we're going to use, and why. Because I always remember to do that. Now that we have this all mapped out, it's going to make that so much easier to do when we go into the next iteration, because then we'll have that bird's eye view where we didn't before. So it's definitely, the framework has helped us, even just in the discussions we've had on our feedback or our reflections. It's been great to guide it so that it's all present to mind, right? To talk about it.